Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carolina Dmowska, and I am the Director of Partnerships at Neue Haus. Welcome to today's conversation with the director and producers of ESPN's breakthrough docuseries, The Last Dance. At Neue Haus, we feel strongly about using our platform to uplift the creative voices who inform and define modern cultural narratives. Today, we bring together the masterminds behind this multi-Emmy nominated project, which unpacks 20 years of Michael Jordan's complex journey to superstar and icon. The story and events of his rise to fame in themselves command the spotlight, but in this program, it's the artfulness of how the story is told that brings us here today. With that, we are delighted to welcome the brilliant storytellers behind The Last Dance. Director, Jason Hehir, executive producer, Michael Tollin, and ESPN's Executive Vice President of Content and Executive Producer, Connor Schell. Moderated by TV Awards Editor at IndieWire, Libby Hill, for a candid conversation on how the art of storytelling brought wisdom, humanity, and life to the story of the most compelling player in the history of sports. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Guys, I loved The Last Dance. Congratulations on your well-deserved Emmy nominations, and thank you so much for being here to speak with me today.
Good to be here. Thanks, Libby.
Welcome. Thank you.
So let us start at the beginning. And by the beginning, I mean 22 years ago, when Jordan and the Bulls agreed to let cameras into the locker room to see behind the scenes what was rumored to be Jordan's final season in the NBA. Where were you in your life when you first learned that this treasure trove of footage existed and was languishing somewhere, not being used?
Well, maybe I'll start because I think I probably learned first among this group here. In 2005 or 2006, I was just starting working on the documentary film group at ESPN and trying to put together an in-house production company to tell sports stories. And someone from the NBA reached out and sent me a version of some scenes and a little bit of an assembled cut of a, documentary that they were going to try to make about Michael in that season. And it started a long journey towards trying to get to where we were 4 months ago when this premiered. Mike?
Yeah, I had you beat by about 7 years, Connor.
Oh, did you? I'm sorry. I didn't even know that.
No, well, that's just because I'm so much older than both you guys. A bit of a head start. I was making a little show called Our List for HBO, which was about, the art of the super sports agent, I think we called it. And David Falk, who was the super agent representing Michael Jordan at the time, did a kind of classic bait and switch. I don't always tell this version of the story, but he was on the cover of the New York Times Magazine, and we wanted desperately to get Michael to do a cameo on the show because we populated the series with a lot of people from the real sports world. And he said, yeah, write parts in for me and Michael. I'll come first, and then I'll get Michael. Guess what happened? Of course, he came. Michael never came. And what we learned later, of course, that even back then, more than 20 years ago, the gatekeeper was really Esty Portnoy, who became our partner in this and one of the executive producers as she and Curtis Polk kind of took over Michael's affairs from David. But there were all these directors that chased it, from Frank Marshall, who was a friend of mine and told me about it and tried to get me involved, to Danny DeVito, of all people, to Spike Lee, who of course did all those commercials with Michael and looked like he was the incumbent for many years. It didn't really get started in this version until the version that ultimately led to it happening till February 2016 in freezing Toronto. And it was a 4.5-year process. And it had a lot to do with the documentary landscape shifting dramatically, thanks in no small part to you, Connor, because OJ Made in America had just premiered all 8 episodes at Sundance the month before, and How to Make America, How to Make a Murderer had premiered on Netflix, and The Jinx was a big hit on HBO. And all of a sudden, everybody realized there was an audience for long form documentaries. And so when we went to the Jordan camp and tried to prevail on them, the pitch was, it's not just going to be the classic documentary tree falling in the forest. This will be a large scale, multi-episode, big platform event. And it ballooned to 10 episodes, and Jason stepped in and carried the ball. Here we are.
Jason, when did you learn this existed? Was it when they first approached you for the project, or were you clued in earlier?
I have a vague recollection. I came out of college in 1998, and I started at NBC Sports as a PA 5 months after Michael won that title, his 6th title in Utah at the end of that season. So we had one of our properties, obviously the NBA on NBC was their crown jewel. So I was a PA on all of that stuff. And I had heard people in the office saying, last season they followed them around with these film cameras, and we can't wait to use that in some of our halftime features and pregame features and things like that. And it was just this kind of urban legend of this footage that may or may not exist. I worked there for a few years, moved on to HBO and other places, and fast forward almost 20 years later, 4 years ago this summer, when Mike asked me to dinner and told me that this footage did indeed exist, and that he had prevailed upon Michael and his team to have it be freed up and made into a documentary. So really the first time that I truly knew that it did exist and laid eyes on the first frames was 4 years ago this summer.
Oh, wow. Mike, why go to Jason? Why was he the right person to tell this story?
Why not? Doesn't the
well, no, that's so true. That's fair.
I got a lot of input from Connor and other people that I'd worked with. I was lucky enough to be in that tent in the beginning of 30 for 30 with Connor Schell and Bill Simmons and John Skipper and John Walsh, and really a seminal moment in contemporary documentary filmmaking. And it really opened all of our eyes to, I hate to get heady with all of us, but like a little bit of the auteur theory. We weren't putting titles on the board and saying we got to check this box and that box. It was, let's find great filmmakers who have stories they're passionate about and let them tell it in their own best way, which is why it made such a splash, because it was so eclectic and it broke all molds of previous documentary storytelling. So naturally, I reached back out to Connor, who I partnered with and done a lot with. And Jason was, the top of his list. And I'd never met Jason, but loved Fab Five. 85 Bears was terrific. And Andre the Giant was on the horizon. And I was excited to meet a new guy, right? So it was pretty easy. I mean, there were a lot of chefs in the kitchen before, during, and after. And so there were a lot of approvals, and Jason has a funny story he may or may not want to tell about the wrong address and the steaming New York summer and coming to a meeting, drenched in sweat. But he kind of felt like the choice all along, and his passion for it, his immersion in it, the beautiful mind kind of approach he took, where I compared to, that movie where he was putting up the 3x5 cards on his walls and reading every word ever written about it. Clearly the right choice.
And I'll just add there that, because I did have a few conversations with Mike about this early on before Jason came on board, but look, I don't know if everybody out there has seen the Fab Five documentary that Jason did. He's done incredible work in The Last Dance, but the Fab Five was really a terrific work, and it used music beautifully. It used archival footage beautifully, but it told this great story, hitting contemporary themes and in, you know, nostalgia in great ways. And it was really a project that fans had embraced among ESPN storytelling on a level that, you know, we hadn't seen before. We'd done a lot of great work, but nothing had cut through commercially in that way. And so much of that was Jason's style of filmmaking is so easy to watch, right? And that's not a, I'm choosing my words carefully, because that's not a, it doesn't mean it's thin and without substance. It doesn't mean it's light in any way. It's just really accessible, right? He dives into, as you saw in this project, really deep, complicated themes and tells stories so well and hits all his elements, but he does it in such an audience-friendly way. And I think Mike and I talked about that piece of that, as my son walks behind me here, really early on in this as so important to what we were doing. Yeah. And then the other thing about Jason from a career perspective is he was at that perfect point of, here's unbelievably talented guy who, given this opportunity, I think we all felt confident he would throw himself into it and just kill it in this way where that you know, and all, I think he surpassed his work, and his team's work here surpassed everyone's expectations. But those were some of the reasons we talked about.
Connor, he told the story of the Fab Five without the key member of the five, right?
Correct.
I mean, well, there's a testament to good storytelling.
I'm sweating.
Jason, are your ears burning?
My PTSD is burning from 2011 and trying to get on with that key member of the Fab Five. We won't discuss that. That's a different conversation. But you know, for me, obviously, that is the Jordan story and the Bulls dynasty story is the Mount Olympus of sports stories that I can tell from my generation. And I have a very even closer relationship to this story, both in the sense that when I started to really understand basketball and standings and stats and all that, really follow the game, is Michael's rookie year. So it's not unique that he was my guy, because he was everybody's guy at that point, but it really hit the trajectory of my sports fandom, really follow the path of his trajectory as a global icon. I was 8 years old when he came in, and by the time he left the league, I was graduating from college. So I kind of went through an education as a sports fan, and Michael cemented his legacy in those years as well. And then also kind of the B story, or the underlying story here that was really fun to kind of weave in, was the evolution of hip hop from a niche attraction, which, you know, kind of redefined the musical landscape the same way that Michael, when he came on, was a niche attraction that redefined basketball, and hip hop's path to global acceptance and global relevance, and Michael's parallel path as well. So that was fun to tell. I just think that generationally, for me, I love stories about nostalgia. I love stories that make you reconsider what you think you know about the main character. And I love stories about these dysfunctional families in sports that come together to achieve greatness. So this checked all the boxes.
That's brilliant. I'm gonna circle back to nostalgia, but let me take this moment to speak of your beautiful mind. How does one sit down with this much footage and try and craft a narrative out of it? Because it feels almost impossible. Where did you begin?
Well, we knew that I think in the very early stages of discussion of this doc, my first meeting that I had once Mike introduced me to the NBA partners and the Jordan brand partners, I was in New York and they were on a video conference in LA. And I remember there was this big kind of like Bruce Wayne dining room table at this agency in New York. And I had to sit at the far end of it because that's where the mic was, but it was like a mile to the screen. So I looked even less significant than I felt on that call. And I remember one of the partners asking, do you think you can make wall to wall this whole series with just the existing footage that they shot in that season. And I said, sorry, that's my dog. And I said, no, I didn't think that that we could fill what at that point was going to be 8 hours. And, you know, given access to all of these guys and their families, in some cases, you want to tell the whole story of the dynasty. I had said to somebody, it's like interviewing Nixon and not asking about Watergate. So you want to ask about the building blocks that were put in place. So pretty soon it became clear we're going to tell not just the story of the 97-98 season, the last dance, as it were, but the Bulls dynasty through the lens of that last season, obviously starring Michael Jordan. But it was kind of a difficult dance to do because it can't be the definitive Michael Jordan story. He was adamant that it shouldn't be that. It's not going to be just about that season. It needs to be about everything, but you have to focus on the season. So it really came down to letting the bedrock, the spine of the series be that 97-98 season, and then picking our spots during the season. Where were these people standing out? Well, obviously episode 1 is going to be about Michael. He's the star. What's going on in the season chronologically in that second month of the season? Scottie Pippen's out. So let's tell his story. Why was he out? Episode 3, how are they filling that void? Dennis Rodman fills the void. So we tell his story. And then Dennis Rodman takes off on his notorious Vegas vacation. And when he returns and Scottie returns, who has to right that ship and who has to manage all these egos? Phil Jackson. So we'll tell his story there. So the backstories became pretty clear once we had a good handle on the 97-98 thread.
Right. Were there stories, were there threads that you were sorry that you couldn't include in the series? Were there is there one that stands out specifically that you really wanted to get in there, but it just didn't fit? One
of the most important parts of telling the story in a story like the Fab Five or the Bears was to tell the ancillary stories, the guys who are elite athletes who don't necessarily get the spotlight, because anyone who's on an NBA stage at one point was the star of their town, the star of their team, probably the star at their college. And then that fades away and the elite of the elite rise up. So I was always interested, probably because I was a bench warmer in basketball myself, I was always interested in telling those stories about the people who surrounded the superstar. We were so blessed with such great stories in our main characters that we didn't have the time to tell the stories of the Luke Longleys and the Ron Harpers, or to go even further into Tony Kukoc's story, which is fascinating. So that wasn't deliberate. It was just a matter of how much real estate we had to tell the story that we told. And, you know, if you had told me at this point in 2020, I'd be saying that we didn't have enough time to tell the story in 10 hours 2 years ago, I would have laughed, because when I found out about 10 hours, my stomach dropped. I didn't know how we were going to fill that. But it became pretty clear with the quality of the interviews and the quality of the footage that we didn't have much of a problem. The problem was getting it all down and deciding what darlings to kill, as Hemingway might say.
In the initial conversation with Michael in July of 2016 with Esty and Curtis, we were just it was going well. He seemed really into it. I took the liberty of, kind of going after a couple of threads and getting a sense of his willingness. And we talked about the Hall of Fame speech, which was infamous at this point. And Esty was excited about having a chance to deconstruct that speech and address it again with the advantage of, a couple of decades. And we sort of figured, as Jason said, trying to balance the story of Michael Jordan's career and the dynasty of the Bulls, how we were going to get into that. And I remember the call during the pandemic when Jason was running this incredible hurry up, less than 2-minute offense, when we were, still kind of laying out the blueprint for episodes 9 and 10, where he said, I'm looking at 10 and the end of the 98 season is the end of the doc. I mean, up until that point, we had, all kinds of ideas about possibly doing the Hall of Fame speech and, kind of an epilogue. And it was really, again, a testament to the organic nature of the process of Jason being able to have the beautiful mind thing, but have it all up there on the board and being able to rearrange and adjust according to the way the stories dictated their telling. And the last episode is so beautiful because the coffee can ceremony and all that went into that, the end of the 6th championship dynasty, anything else, I think in retrospect feels anticlimactic. So it really worked out right.
let me pull back a little bit, because I kind of jumped over this huge component, which was how do you finally convince Michael Jordan to sign off on this project, and not just sign off, but to actively participate in it?
Well, I'm going to give some real credit to Curtis Polk and Esty Portnoy, because like I said, I met in February with them, and I was kind of alerting them to the opportunity, and I think the increased appetite among documentary viewers. Michael came by the lunch table, and they made a point of making sure that we said hello just so it would register. And for 4 months, I was exchanging ideas and materials, building what we call a lookbook, pictures, words, ideas, timelines, all kinds of very hypothetical, very premature, but just give him a sense. And they were careful, and they were tough, and they really did their job well. And it took us till the draft week, when they knew Michael Jordan would be, quote, captive. He would be in Charlotte. He couldn't escape to play golf, because he had to be there at the head of the war room picking the choice for the Hornets. And they sent me on a red eye, and I went to see him, and he started leafing through this book. And he was very, I mean, the one thing I said, which I don't want to make too much of it, it makes for a great story. I have no idea if it really had any impact or not, but I wrote him a letter, not knowing if I'd ever actually get to sit down with him. Dear Michael, every day producers come into my office wearing your shoes who've never seen you play. It's time. He smiled. He put his reading glasses on, kept reading. I have no idea. I really feel now, with the perspective of 4 years, that just it was right time, right place. Enough time had passed. He's got a new family, a new wife, two great young kids. He's in a good place in his life. Business is going great. He juggles, lots of friends, the shoe business, the tequila business, the team, many other enterprises. As you can see, he was leaning in the whole time. He was eager. He was ready. Esty and Curtis get a lot of credit for creating a scarcity. The mythology around Michael, to some extent, owes it to the fact that we never hear from him, and we don't know what he's thinking. And Jason's research was so good. His approach was so perfect. He really just had a meeting out of his hand. But I think he just felt like, okay, I'm in a comfortable, protected zone here. I'm ready. It's time. Let's, create this legacy piece. And Jason, I'll let him tell it, but that first interview, we were on such pins and needles. He could get up at any time and just walk away, and it would be over. And Jason just orchestrated that beautifully.
And I think before Jason jumps into that story, like the one thing I'll add to everything Mike said is spot on. And I think I want to reference back to something Mike said answering your first question. I also think that part of Mike's sell, which I think in retrospect was very compelling, was the format and the ability to have the expansive format and the ability for Michael to be comfortable that the whole story was going to be told, and that it wouldn't be all of this and all of this history and his whole career and all of his teammates and everything boiled down into 90 minutes and hey, we're going to get it all here. And it'll feel very superficial and very much what people either already knew or expected or would misunderstand without the context. And I think, Mike did a really good job of teeing up initially that expansive format would allow for context, right? And that context is everything in a story like this.
Yeah, it's a very gradual process to try and gain the trust of someone that you're going to get very limited time with. We had 8 hours of him in the chair with 3 shoots over the course of 18 months, 19 months. So it wasn't like we were embedded with him and I could cultivate some sort of relationship. So I give credit, like Connor said, to Mike for cultivating that relationship with Esty and Curtis, who are kind of Michael's proxies. And I'm sure that there was, they're vetting, even when you don't know they're vetting if you just think you're going out to a lunch. And I was acutely aware of that. but they were wise enough to get me in front of Michael a few times. So at least he knew my face. I could explain a little bit. I could try and demonstrate my knowledge of the subject matter and the fact that I could at least hold a relaxed conversation with him. I wasn't going to be posing for pictures or asking for autographs or doing anything that like a super fan might do. Whatever he was afraid of the normal person who approaches him, I wanted to try and kind of disabuse him of the notion that I was going to be anything except just a responsible director who's there to tell a comprehensive story. So Mike told that story about him coming in that day, that first interview. We really didn't know what to expect. We didn't. He was contracted for 2 interviews, and he ended up giving us 3, but it was 2. So we knew that first interview, that could be 20 minutes, it could be 3 hours. And if it doesn't go well, I have a team of editors waiting back in New York who we need material for at least the first 4 episodes of a 10-hour doc. If I don't come back to them with enough for them to cut a rough cut of 4 episodes, we're in big, big trouble, because the next interview, I can't be starting on episode 1. I need to start way into the story. So about 20 minutes into that interview, we were talking about the early Bulls teams, his rookie year Bulls team. And I said that one writer called it the Chicago Bulls traveling cocaine circus. And he threw his head back, and it elicited this laugh that I had never heard before. And all the research that I had done for 2 years leading up to that day, I'd never heard that laugh. And I've seen every YouTube clip, just about every interview from CBS and NBC and everybody else. So that was a great indication. Now, he is savvy enough to bob and weave through that question and say no comment. And it would have been a nice moment just with the laugh. But the fact that he took it the next step and offered that anecdote about being a rookie and finding that party, knocking on the door. He's such a great storyteller. He's playing characters as you go. I mean, it's riveting to listen to him. He's the Michael Jordan of telling stories about behind the scenes in the NBA. That was the moment, I think, that everyone was like, wow, he's not just coming in name. He's not going to pay lip service. He came to actually do this, because he easily could have sidestepped that question. And instead he gave us one of my favorite moments of the entire series.
Well, let me ask you a slightly theoretical question. Could this project have happened, say Michael Jordan signs off on it, but he doesn't want to participate? Are you still pursuing that project, or is this something that it has to be Michael or nothing?
Well, the deal was, I think we all have a different perspective on that. There have been plenty of unauthorized biographies. There's a big multi-part sports biography going on right now, Tiger Woods. He's not participating in it at all. They're getting a lot of interviews. There was a book. There's more than enough material in theory to do this without Michael. I don't know if I'm speaking for the other guys, but I wouldn't have done it. And as I recall the process, having heard about it all those years, and then seeing, as we've been saying, the landscape sort of catch up to our interest in the subject matter, I went to the NBA to say, hey guys, if we can get Michael to say yes, are you in? Because remember, the NBA shot the material, the NBA owned the material. Adam had an understanding with Michael Jordan that if you don't agree to the usage of this footage, we're just going to keep it for your home movie collection. So I think morally, ethically, if not legally, it just wouldn't have happened. And, that's what everybody was coming for, to hear Michael's version. So I think it's a non-starter.
Yeah, I'll answer that slightly differently. If he says yes and you can use the footage, you can make a perfectly watchable documentary here about what happened 22 years ago with the greatest basketball team, and greatest living sports hero. It's just not nearly at the level of what was achieved by having the participants, with the benefit of time and perspective, and having Michael bring you inside what he was going through. And to the point that Mike made before about scarcity and how Michael, calculated or not in this, has managed his brand by, not doing interviews, not appearing everywhere, not participating in things like this. It was riveting to hear what Jason just described, and to see him tell a story, to hear him, like, that's really, that interview, that participation, that level of intimacy with him is, in my mind, what brought this to the level it got to.
I think the more specific question, I agree with what Mike and Connor said. Just to add to that from my perspective, when I first was told about this, when Mike first told me, I had, the benefit of 18 years of cynicism, 22 now. I'm a little less cynical actually after this project, because I know that actually when people do come together and get things done in a way that's more than you thought you could do. But at that point, I remember calling Ezra Edelman, who's a friend of mine and had just finished OJ, and he's a friend, and I admire him, his talent and his work, his body of work, and just what he knows how to do. And I said, I assumed there were going to be conditions. So I was trying to get sign off from people I really respect, and hoping they would say, you know what, you got the opportunity, you got to take it. It's Michael Jordan, and whatever governor switch they put on this thing, you have to just abide by that. And that's pretty much what, Ezra, I think, is a little more of a hardcore journalist and storyteller than me. And I think that he would have pushed back a little bit more if there were limitations. But I'm thinking, this is a shot to sit down with a guy who is a two-dimensional figure in my life, a poster, a logo on a shoe, an image on a t-shirt. You can't pass that up. And maybe I'll try and, push it a little bit during the interview, and if I get yelled at afterwards. That was my thought in 2016. By 2018, when we sat down, he had already made clear to me that, and even his representatives had made clear, there is nothing off the table. They understood from the get-go that in order for this to be a respectable, comprehensive story with integrity, and not just a puff piece, that we need to go places that might be uncomfortable. We need to discuss gambling. We need to discuss his father's death. We need to discuss the rumors that he was responsible for that death. We need to discuss the rumors that he was suspended, the secret suspension, because of his gambling. We need to discuss his demeanor towards his teammates and whether or not that's acceptable and how they felt about it. If you had told me 4 years ago that we were going to have a teammate of Michael's say he's an asshole in this documentary, I would have said, you're crazy. But it's a credit to them and a credit to Michael. There are stories out there that I've read, a narrative that says that this was Michael Jordan's production company was in control of it, and Michael had final say all along. I know he doesn't have a production company, and I've never seen the big contract that you guys have probably seen, this leather-bound book that was being built for 22 years. But if they had that power, they never exercised it, because there was never one time where I was told, don't ask this, I'm not going to answer that. I sent him topics just to remind him, like, hey, we're going to be talking about the 93 finals. This was the score, because some of these guys, they don't remember the games. I remember he said to me when he walked into that second interview, I saw your email, I didn't even look at it. Ask me anything you want, I'm going to answer you honestly. The word that he kept using was honestly, honestly, honestly. Who did you interview last time? Did they speak honestly? That's what he was concerned about. So I am thrilled with the fact that we got the cooperation we did from all partners involved, and I'm proud of where the project ultimately landed.
To echo that, Chase, I've seen the contract. There's no leather.
Might be some blood.
It's not really that impressive, but I can tell you for sure he does not have final cut or anything approaching it. And furthermore, if you really go through, it's not like he didn't. So there's these different levels. When I first got him to shake my hand and say, let's do it, having done a couple of documentaries with, sports icons who took very different approaches to it, I said, so Michael, are you going to be like Kareem, who wanted to know every person we were interviewing, wanted to see every daily, wanted to see every cut, wanted to be in the cutting room? Or are you going to be like Hank Aaron, who said, I'll see you at the premiere? And he said, I'll be much more like Hank. Well, he was actually in a really great place right in the middle of that spectrum, which is to say that he did watch every episode, and he offered comments, but they were all additive. They were never censorious. They, like, for instance, I know Jason loved this, and it was a great addition. There was a game in his when he came back in '95, and we showed his debut in Indiana where he couldn't hit the side of a barn, and then he ends up in Madison Square Garden with the double nickel game, right? And in between, there was this game-winning shot at the buzzer that, for whatever reasons, didn't fit in, or we didn't have time for it. And he said, you know,
I didn't know about it.
Well, okay.
I'll be honest, I didn't know about it.
So he said, you might want to look at it, because it was kind of the thing that gave me the confidence without which I could have never had that kind of performance against the Knicks. So, okay. Another issue, Jason went through the litany of the big kind of pressure points that we felt like we needed to address. There was another, which was his activism or lack thereof. Famously, he said Republicans buy sneakers or shoes too. That thing has been played over and over again and twisted into all kinds of different shapes. And Jason asked him about it, and we went right back to that election that he did or didn't participate in. And I remember him, through his reps, saying, I'd like to talk about that again. Not don't use that, or I don't want that to be in the show, but I'd actually like to talk about that again, because there's some thoughts I haven't expressed or I'd like to express differently. And it made for a much more honest and thoughtful section, which again, you know, just shows his willingness to like tell it all and leave it to the filmmakers to put the story together.
I think it's important too to add that it was corrective. It was not corrective. It was additive. He wasn't saying, I don't like the way that I phrased that, ask me again. There was never any of that. There was never take that out. There was never, you know what, I don't like what I said about that guy, take that out. There was never one moment of that in our entire editing process. And I absolutely thought that we would encounter that. Despite everybody's, you know, optimism at the beginning, I thought, you know, I'd said a few
the number of phone calls saying, Jason, don't worry, you'll get there.
Oh God. But I'd said a bunch of times during April and May when we were doing press on this and we were editing the show on this laptop that I'm looking at right now, and we were cobbling together this workflow, we were also doing press because we were airing the shows as we built them. And I had said, you know, I can't believe that he's going to let us show some of the stuff that he let us show in 7 and 8. Now, it doesn't mean that he's, you know, there were no huge admissions or anything, but it's certainly, there was some stuff in there that was not flattering. And if it's a puff piece, then you're going to show stuff that's not, you're not going to show stuff that's not flattering. If you have Final Cut, you're not likely to show stuff that's not flattering. So the proof is in the pudding there, that Final Cut was not just with them. Final Cut was with a host of entities, and that's its own challenge. But I think that the project was better for it.
And just to add, you know, obviously credit to Michael for going all of these places with Jason in those interviews, and Jason for taking them there. But also, you know, we've mentioned the names Esty Portnoy and Curtis Polk a lot here, and deservedly so. I mean, they deserve a tremendous amount of credit for understanding from day one that for this to make real impact, it had to be real, right? It had to go those places, be authentic. You know, we're discussing, you know, even though it's Michael Jordan, he's a human being, and you know, you've got to look at him as a you know, every aspect of Michael and what went into making that team, and you know, I think they understood from day one that authentic nature mattered, and it would make it that much easier for people to connect with it.
Something I'm curious about along those lines is a strategy that, Jason, it seemed you employed during the interviews to kind of draw out an immediate reaction as opposed to maybe a measured reaction, which is giving like Michael an iPad or something to see what someone else has said about them, and then getting his reaction just from watching the video, which I think several times in the documentary is so interesting. And someone informed me before we started speaking that was something that you actually used to get people who weren't Michael to open up and talk about things by showing them footage of him commenting on a situation. How did you come up with that strategy, and how did that kind of creative thinking enhance your ability to tell this story fully?
It was the strategy was twofold. That I don't want to act like I'm a trailblazer. I've seen that technique used, maybe not with an iPad, but there's certainly been. You can look back to the Maisels use that with the Rolling Stones and Give Me Shelter. This is,
Oh, sure.
I've always loved that notion of, because it's candid. And when you're showing someone something for the first time, it's very difficult to mask whatever visceral reaction you're going to have. So during the Masters 2018, Masters Sunday 2018, Esty Portnoy, like the bat phone rang and she said, can you get up to Midtown and hang out with Michael and come with us to the Barclays Center for a Jordan Brand event and just spend a little bit of time with him, because we knew that the interview was imminent. So credit to her for facilitating these meetings, because what came of it is that we were talking and somehow the topic came up of whether or not he'd ever been ejected. And I called up a YouTube clip of a compilation of his fights set to music. And I'm holding this phone right here out to him like this, and he grabbed the phone, which looks like a box of Tic Tacs in his hand, and immediately was locked in and started kind of like murmuring to himself and giving little anecdotes about what happened in the hallway after the game and who else was off camera, who started that. And he said this to me before and I'm thinking to myself, like, I always use my brothers and my friends as the benchmark for like, all right, what story do I want to tell? It's oftentimes when you come out of these interviews, it's what's the first thing you tell your friends at dinner about whatever interview you're doing, whether it's with Michael Jordan or Michael Smith. What's the first thing you tell? Well, the first thing that I would tell people is you should have seen what he did when he saw himself playing back then, and especially fighting back then. So then it was, how can we recreate that for the audience? So it became, instead of just my phone out of my pocket, let's get a big iPad Pro. And by the way, that iPad Pro is missing and it's somewhere. And if it's got Michael's fingerprints on it, that it could go for a good sum on eBay or somewhere else, but no one can find it. So then that technique I decided to use that on other players that you mentioned, really as an emergency, kind of the way that you occupy a puppy's attention or try to get a kid to calm down. It was with Dennis Rodman. And he was so just kind of herky-jerky and all over the place that it was almost like I was the substitute teacher and the principal comes in, showing him Michael talking about him. He was all of a sudden just like, he was in line and he was behaving. So it shows you, the shadow that Michael still casts over some of these guys is that if he's talking about them, even a guy like Dennis Rodman, who's a global icon himself, he's kind of like bashful and attentive when you show him, Michael said this about you. So we ended up using that and showing the same clip to Phil Jackson and to Scottie Pippen. And as far as the outcome of it with Michael is that he doesn't know me. He met me those few times and we spent a few hours together total over the course of 2 years. But he does know the people who were talking in those clips. And he is still as competitive as ever, as you can see when he hears Gary Payton and Reggie Miller and Isaiah Thomas talking. And if I tell him, your mom read us a letter and it seems like you were a homesick freshman, just like all the other kids, it's way different when I show him his mother and he tears up seeing his mother read that letter. And who knows what's going through his mind as a multi-billionaire now when he's saying that he doesn't have money for stamps as an 18-year-old. So it was just a much more effective tool than my trying to convey to him what someone told me is, let's bring this person in the room and let them tell you themselves.
That's brilliant. So pulling out again a little bit and looking at the broader picture, I think people often see sports as something distinctly different from art, but the two things feel like they have tremendous overlap. Do you think to be an elite sports person, an elite athlete, do you think that person has to be creative? Do you think they have to have a sort of creative streak within them to be great?
I think that they have to approach the game in a way, whatever their craft is, they have to approach it in a way that hasn't been approached before to be the kind of generational athlete that people like Michael and Serena and, a host of others, Tiger, these are all people who the common denominator is their passion and their work ethic. It's no, I sound like a guy who's making a speech to a bunch of kids at a camp, but it's so true when you see these people, the common denominator is they're the first ones in the gym and the last ones out, no matter what sport they play. Michael may not have been in the top 2 athletes on that Bulls team. You could argue that Rodman and Pippen were better overall athletes than Michael. He probably wouldn't like if I said that, if someone shows him an iPad of me saying that. But it's about work, and it's about redefining your approach. Jerry Krause, who has been much maligned when we talk about this, and he's another one that that's the number one person I wish I could have interviewed for this project that we didn't get to interview, was Jerry Krause, because he obviously passed away. But he had to reconsider the structure of an NBA team and how you build an NBA team, who you build it around, because until then, you build it around a big man. Hakeem Olajuwon was the number one pick in the year that Michael went third. So for Jerry Krause to build a team around a two guard, that's revolutionary. And these athletes, their approaches are revolutionary, and their work ethic is second to none. So yes, I think that a tremendous amount of creativity and thinking outside the box has to go into being as great as these people have become.
To paraphrase a classic Yogi Berra-ism, 90% of sports is 50% mental. I think Yogi's math was questionable, but people always talk about basketball IQ. People talk about Michael's acuity, Michael's presence of mind. One of my favorite, maybe unsung sections of the documentary is in the beginning of episode 10. Mark Vansel, one of Michael's biographers, talks about his ability to be present. Why is Michael Jordan so clutch? Why does he always hit the big shot, it seems? Because he's relaxed, he's self-confident, he's assured. He wants that ball. He's going to make that shot over Craig Elo all day long. So there's a piece that comes with all of those mental strengths that is as responsible for Michael's greatness as Jason said, as his physicality. Creativity, yes. Will to win, yes. Work ethic. Connor can chime in on this because he's the ESPN executive right now, presiding over the bubble. And I watched the guy last night. I'm a Philly guy. I watched the Sixers self-implode against the Celtics. We have maybe the most athletically gifted player on our team, Joel Embiid. He's 7'2". He should be unstoppable. He has none of those mental gifts. He doesn't seem to care. He's not in shape. He's not motivated. He's not assertive. Michael,
That's fired. Mike Tollin.
Seriously.
Well, that's being a Philly fan. As the process finally disappears into the Atlantic Ocean, but it was so beautiful to watch Michael, the way he plays defense. It's as important as offense. So yes, it is the full package.
Absolutely. So let's turn our attention to the circumstances with which Last Dance made it on the air. Obviously, this has been an unprecedented year. Especially sports have been especially hard hit. There was a push for The Last Dance to come out early. People wanted it. People needed to see it. How do you get something that is incomplete done 2 months early because people need to see it? Because people need something to love.
You hire the best crew that I have ever worked with in my life, and probably will be lucky enough to work with in my life. You hire world-class editors who have world-class setups in their homes already. You hire a group of people, small group, 10 or 12 of us, who became a family over those 2 years. I mean, we had morning meetings in front of this gigantic corkboard to discuss where this story was going to go, how it was going to flow from episode 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. So by the time it was like the final exam, by the time we had to lock down, we were with each other, not physically. We could be with each other on a Zoom call or an email thread or a text chain, but we were also with each other in spirit. I know that sounds corny, but we all agreed on what the story should be. And we all, at that point, our roles were very clearly delineated. So it really felt like a 2-minute drill. It was like, okay, we got the ball back. We have to score. We don't have a choice here. We promised ESPN that it would be done by mid-May. And it was ESPN's brilliant decision to do it 5 weeks out, 2 at a time on Sundays. So it dominated the sports news cycle for the entire week. And then it was just a matter of coming up with ways, this kind of daisy chaining this thing together. It was like MacGyvering this show, MacGyvering this workflow together to say, okay, I can do minutes 3 to 5 on this laptop here of episode 10. Chad, you get minutes 1 to 9 on episode 9. Devin, I need you to do the changes for the second half of episode 8 because we're still there. Friday, March 13th was 2 days after the Rudy Gobert game. We were supposed to finalize mix and color on episode 4. And I was not feeling well. I had a fever. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to go in and breathe down the neck of a colorist and a sound mixer all day because none of us knew anything. And I figured, you know what? This will pass. We'll be out for a week and then we'll come back and it's going to be a tough couple of months, but that'll be it. The last time I saw my staff was March 12th. So they relocated, all of these technicians relocated all of this multi-million-dollar equipment into their apartments. And if you've been to New York and you've been to a New York apartment, there's not room for multi-million-dollar equipment. So I don't exactly know how they did it, but I can't say enough about the resourcefulness, the dedication, the passion. I mean, people working literally through the night long before we came on air because the deadlines for these things, you can't air episode 7 unless it's pretty much done 2 weeks before. So there were deadlines that we had to be aware of and a clock ticking in 10 different ways for 10 different episodes all throughout the process. But we got it done and I am beyond proud of that group.
And we started, we started with the premise of, we had a great plan for this in June. I mean, we did. And when the sports world stopped and we all understood that figuring out a way to get this content out to fans, by the way, to well beyond just basketball fans, right? Figuring out it would be really important, not just for the project, but it was something that was important to the whole Walt Disney Company to figure out how to get that done. I mean, from the first phone call to Jason, where we started with his post supervisor and others saying, okay, when can we have episode 10 done? And now let's work a timeline backwards. I mean, the notion of the sort of can-do spirit of people, like, I don't mean to sound really cliched when I say that, but there was not one person involved in, every level of that who didn't immediately get creative in a completely different kind of way to figure out how they could innovate the process and get this done. And, some really unlikely ideas came from different places on how to accelerate this. And it was, it's really remarkable to get on a call and sort of introduce that kind of disruptive change in the midst of everybody's worlds being turned upside down and having every single person involved go, great, we're going to figure this out. And I mean, I'm truly thankful that it worked out the way it did. Sorry, Mike, go ahead. I cut you off, but. No,
I was just going to toot your horn to say, to move, this is an aircraft carrier, the Walt Disney Company, to pivot the way you did with the alacrity, with the full support. The promo campaign was stunning, considering that it was almost like completely reinvented on the fly. Seth Ader, who was head of your promos, gets enormous credit. Your colleagues, Libby Geist and John Dahl, were with us every step of the way, engineering, all the hurry up offense that Jason refers to. A 6 or 8 week process in terms of turning around cuts now had to be done in 6 days, if that. And it was amazing. As you said, I guess the silver lining of a pandemic is seeing what we can do when we put our minds to it, when we are truly unified toward a common goal. And it was such a source of gratitude for all of us to be able to get that sort of response and bring families together and kind of reinvent the water cooler culture and have it that sort of social impact. It was incredible.
I'll show you something here. This is the drive with this is 10,000 hours of footage on this. All of the footage of the Bulls of that 97-98 season. Matt Maxon, who is our technical producer, once the lockdown went into effect, stayed overnight for consecutive nights to cut these. You can't just hit copy, click, drop, drag, and it copies. This takes, a day full to copy all the footage from the project onto this. Matt got one of these into my hands when subways had stopped, cars had stopped. This was the true lockdown days in late March. Got one of these into my hand, obviously, and then one each to our editors and one to our senior producer, Jake Rogal. And this is how we communicated, was by doing work on these and sending that out to each other. So we never thought this is not something I even want to carry home from work. It's bulky and we never thought that we'd be communicating that way. But it's what these guys said just now, is that there was immediate creativity there was never a doubt of, okay, we're going to get it done. And by the way, I loved having a firm deadline at that point, because now it's airing. There can't be any more notes. There can't be. This thing has to go on April 19th. So we can't go. We started editing episode 1 in September of 2018. And we finished editing episode 1 in April of 2020. And then we also started editing episodes 9 and 10 in March of 2020 and finished those in May of 2020. So I loved the deadline. I'm the guy who, I started writing the 20-page paper the night before it was due in college, and I kind of work better that way. So, the world was crumbling, and it was a really, really scary time, but there was a good distraction to get out of bed and walk 6 feet to my desk, and that was my office. And then to plug this thing in, it's super loud too, to plug that in and just work on it that way. I'll never forget it.
And it was, I will say that there is to Jason's point, it did allow Mike, myself, the folks at the NBA, Curtis and Esty, we were able to give clarity in a different way to Jason, and sort of all the different opinions and thoughts, had to kind of coalesce in a day versus a month or more. And the sort of back and forth of, what I would deem a healthy exchange of ideas, but was constantly slowing Jason's process down, all had to melt away. And frankly, in retrospect, that may have helped.
Yeah, definitely helped. When we originally positioned this thing, it was going to be for the 20th anniversary of The Last Dance. So that was June, July, 2018. We only missed it by 2 years.
We didn't even interview Michael until a week after the anniversary of The Last Dance. So
the best laid plans, obviously. Let me ask you all just one more question that I'd love to hear the answer from all of you. The response to this series has been, I think you'd agree, extraordinary. What is it about this story and the way this story is told that resonates so strongly with people? What is it about the nostalgia for this specific man, for this specific team, for this specific, honestly, era of the NBA? And why do you think it brought people such comfort in this time?
Well, I can say this, that for the people who lived through it, and whether they were big sports fans or casual sports fans, they remember the Jordan era. And a lot of the 90s and the 80s, the music, the fashion, the grainy television, it reminds us of a time, we can all remember where we were when we saw certain Michael Jordan feats. Whether you're a sports fan or not, you knew the first time that someone wore Air Jordans, or the first time you saw him dunk from the foul line. So there's a certain warmth to that nostalgia. Because a lot of his memories, there's very few disappointing Michael Jordan memories. It was a glorious era for the NBA and a glorious time to watch this athlete. So people could relive that during a very scary time in April and May. And then the next generation who knew about this, but really hadn't seen him play. And as Mike said in that letter that he gave to Michael way back in the beginning, there's a generation of kids who are wearing your shoes and don't really know who you are. They know the Jordan brand, they know the logo, but they don't know Michael Jordan, and that he went to UNC and came in and took, a team that got barely 7,000 people to half fill Chicago Stadium to become this global monolith, and this global sensation. So I think that new generation could appreciate it as well. So it's nostalgia for the old generation, and then them sharing it with the new generation, oftentimes together. The most rewarding notes that I got were from, just random fans throughout the globe who were writing to me on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or whatever and saying, thank you for this. I watched with my daughter. Now she knows about Michael, why I always say this. And thank you for letting me share this with my dad. So that was really rewarding and gratifying.
I agree with all that. A combination of nostalgia and discovery on those two parallel tracks. Clearly the pandemic cleared the lane and brought viewers to our series that may not have discovered it then or ever. Although I have to say, I heard Bob Costas on the radio today. They're still talking about this series months and months later, which is flattering. And he said, yeah, probably the viewership was larger, but it would have been as resonant anyway, just because of what it was. And so to what it was and why it worked so well, I would put it in two categories. The first bucket is just greatness, a transcendent figure who was not just the greatest at what he did, but was incredibly magnetic, charismatic, beloved, globally, everywhere. You can't really define that. You just know it when you see it. And to see it again, to see the commercials, to see the mannerisms, the facial gestures, and then just the ability to rise above and conquer always. Greatness takes many shapes and forms. And, you know, what we hear at the end of episode 7, when Jason asked that very pointed question of how do you feel about the price you paid in your relationships in order to achieve at the level that you insisted on achieving, and he breaks down and nearly cries. That was stunning. And people like Nick Saban have clipped off those 2 or 3 minutes and shown them to his team to say, this is what it takes. Now, maybe not for everybody, but for Michael, that's what it took. And that's the price he paid. And to get that level of honesty and candor, for him to be that exposed like that, was, you know, we all couldn't believe we were actually in that bubble like that. So it was really the transcendent nature of Michael and the extraordinary cast of characters. But finally, the storytelling. Hate to say all these nice things to Jason, about Jason, in front of Jason, with Jason, but
God forbid.
It was an enormous craft, tender, loving care, passion, dedication, and talent, and just grateful to be part of the ride, man.
Likewise.
Yeah, and look, I echo everything Mike and Jason just said, and they captured it pretty well. I'll add 2 quick things. I mean, one, we didn't talk about it here, but I mentioned it briefly in sort of the other work Jason's done as well. His use of music, the choices of music throughout, really gave this a nostalgic and a cultural element that I thought was really spectacular, really connected with people. Jason mentioned before this sort of idea of it connecting with fans on these multiple levels. And I just want to take a minute to acknowledge how hard that is, right? To be able to tell a story of this magnitude that is equally appealing to people who lived this. And by the way, passionate sports fans, as you heard Mike when he was talking about Philadelphia, like they already think they know everything. And so to appeal to them and at the same time appeal to a group of people that are experiencing Michael Jordan for the first time, either as basketball fans who weren't alive or just weren't paying attention, and to get equal levels of credit from both of those groups is really remarkable storytelling and execution from Jason. And then the last thing I'll say, though, to answer your question dead on is Mike just waxed on very nicely about greatness and excellence and sacrifice and all these things. And I think generally in sports, you know, we see the end product, right? And we get to experience the triumph or the sort of devastation of the win or the loss, but rarely on this intimate a level do we get to really understand the context of the journey, right? And that part of this, the over 10 hours, the sort of seeing Michael in that first interview, talking about wanting to put the Bulls on the map, you know, on the level that the Lakers and the Celtics and are on the map. And I think you might have said the 76ers too in that, Mike, to tell you how long ago it was. And then Jason referenced that at the end, that clip, that archival clip, and the power that archival clip had the second time you saw it, because you'd been on this ride, right? And you understood all of those elements of this group of people who had to come together. They had to have shared sacrifice. You'd heard all of Phil's pearls of wisdom, how he kept them together. It made the winning, even if you'd seen it before, that much more powerful when you had the context of the full story. And I thought Jason and, you know, Nina and Jake and everybody who touched this handled that piece beautifully.
Absolutely. Guys, Mike, Jason, Connor, thank you so much for joining us to talk about your brilliant series, The Last Dance. This has really been a joy, and thank you for making something so wonderful and sharing it with the world. So
Thank you.
I will
Thank you.
Appreciate
say
it.
good day. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.